It begins with a voice, half whispered, half mocking, as if daring the listener to stay awake. Imagine scrolling through your phone tomorrow and seeing your name trending worldwide, only it's not because you posted a funny meme or released a hit song. No, it's because your punishment has become public spectacle, archived for eternity. Think you could stomach medieval justice? Spoiler, most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. The Romans, however, never blinked. So before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and the local time in the comments. I like to imagine exactly where and when these words find you. As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold, an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. Somewhere behind the marble facades of Rome's grandeur hides the truth no poet wanted to carve into stone, a truth buried in chains and brands waiting for you to hear it. The slave woman crouches in the corner of a dim courtyard, a crude iron collar biting into her neck. The device isn't just a leash, it's an announcement. Inscribed on the band are words so blunt they sting even centuries later: "Hold me lest I escape, and return me to my master." Branding and collars transform her body into a billboard, the ancient equivalent of a viral hashtag, except there's no escape, no mute conversation button. The daily humiliation starts with the body. Slaves are property in Roman law, stripped not just of freedom, but of identity. A free citizen might boast a family lineage. A slave woman is introduced by the name of her owner, if she's introduced at all. Historians still argue whether this absolute dehumanization was exaggerated by elite writers or whether it truly defined every moment of existence. What's beyond debate is that the law considered her less than a person, more like a tool that could be bought, traded, or discarded. There are records of runaway notices, stone tablets announcing rewards for capturing missing women. The descriptions read with chilling detail: height, hair, scars, even the way they walked. A fringe tidbit: some masters used crocodile fat as sunscreen on slaves working outdoors, a grotesque form of care meant to preserve their investment. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of workers' comp, except it came in slimy reptilian goo and not with a paycheck. Her chains clink against the courtyard floor as she sweeps. Iron weights dangle from her ankles, not heavy enough to immobilize her, but sufficient to remind her of the constant leash. The neighbors pass by without staring. It's as ordinary to them as seeing someone unlock their car in a modern parking lot. Rome's society depends on slavery so thoroughly that 1 in 3 people might be enslaved in the capital at its peak. Imagine looking around your office or your favorite cafe and realizing a third of the people aren't there by choice. The branding isn't just physical, it's social. She cannot testify in court against a free citizen. If she is beaten, the law shrugs. If she is killed, the fine for her death may be less than the cost of damaging livestock. Even her name can be taken, replaced with something short and crude: Dorcas, Myrtis, Irene, labels more than identities. One scholar suggests that masters deliberately renamed women with diminutives to stunt their dignity. Historians still argue whether these names carried affectionate irony or pure mockery. Yet behind the suffocation, small acts of resistance exist. A whispered insult, a stolen crust of bread, a moment of daydreaming while laboring under the whip. They're not the grand rebellions celebrated in epic tales, but micro-revolts of the human spirit. Even laughter short, bitter, shared between 2 women when the overseer isn't watching, becomes an act of defiance. 3 jokes sneak into the air: a comment about how the master's wig looks like a dead rat, a mutter about how even Jupiter probably envies their stamina, and the quip that if Rome collapsed tomorrow, the slaves would finally get a day off. It's gallows humor, the kind that keeps despair at bay for another hour. The heat of the sun presses on her bare shoulders, where scars from lashes overlap like maps of pain. Modern tourists may walk the ruins and marvel at the engineering, the arches, the aqueducts, but none of those marvels exist without her kind of labor. She knows it, even if no historian will record her name. The cobblestones absorb her sweat, and Rome's glory is built quite literally on her broken back. She remembers when she was free. A village in Thrace, a festival by the river, the smell of pine smoke. It all vanished one afternoon when Roman soldiers stormed in. The memory of chains on her wrists as she was herded with others is sharper than the memory of her mother's face. Trauma has a cruel way of editing memory. highlighting the pain while smudging the joy. At night, when the chains are locked to the post, she drifts into uneasy dreams. In them, she is nameless yet again, but this time because she has dissolved into anonymity, not because the law has erased her. Somewhere, deep in that dream, she senses that her suffering is not temporary, but systemic, woven into the very fabric of Roman society, and that knowledge, more than the lash, is the true torture. The courtyard is silent, except for the scrape of her broom. A dog barks in the distance. The master's footsteps echo closer, measured and heavy. Her body stiffens, knowing another day of humiliation is about to be invented on the spot. And the worst part? She can't predict whether it will be a slap, an errand, or something darker. The suspense lingers, the moment stretches, and the cruelty of anticipation gnaws harder than the collar itself. The morning begins long before sunrise. She is shaken awake not by kindness, not by any gentle nudge, but by the shrill scrape of a wooden door and the crack of a stick against the wall. The overseer bellows, and the courtyard stirs with groggy bodies. A slave woman learns quickly that sleep is a luxury, not a right. If she's lucky, she manages a few hours before the rooster crows. If unlucky, she's pulled awake 2, maybe 3 times in the night to fetch water, grind grain, or clean after her master's drunken feast. She stumbles into the fields with the others, chains clanking softly like background music no one in Rome finds strange anymore. The workday stretches impossibly long. It's the kind of endlessness modern workers complain about in office memes, but this is no keyboard, no air conditioning, no chance to sneak a glance at cat videos. Instead, there's sun blistering on bare skin, soil clumping beneath cracked nails, and a wooden hoe that feels heavier each hour. The Romans perfected many things: architecture, law, road building. But mercy? Not so much. Every strike of the hoe into the dirt is monitored. Overseers carry whips, and though some wield them sparingly to preserve labor power, others relish the chance to swing freely. Historians still argue whether Roman estate management encouraged calculated discipline or simply tolerated sadism. Either way, the result is the same for her: a back striped with welts and a mind weighed down with exhaustion. The tasks never end. When she isn't in the field, she's indoors at the loom. Spinning and weaving are considered women's work, though for a slave woman it's less of a domestic art and more of a production line. One quirky tidbit preserved in Roman texts: some masters demanded their slaves spin wool naked, supposedly to prevent theft of materials. Imagine clocking into your shift and being told to strip for quality control. That's not innovation, it's humiliation disguised as management. The loom's creak keeps rhythm with the pounding in her temples. Her fingers bleed from rough fibers, but stopping isn't an option. She tries to keep her mind occupied. She hums old songs from her homeland under her breath, nearly inaudible under the clatter. It's a thin act of defiance, but it's hers. Sometimes, if she's sent into town with errands, the rhythm changes. She carries baskets of goods, jugs of wine, or the endless laundry that Roman aristocrats treat as beneath them. The streets swarm with noise vendors shouting prices, carts rattling over cobblestones, the smell of fish mixed with sewage. To passers-by, she's invisible. They step around her as though she's part of the scenery, no more remarkable than the fountain or the stray dogs. The paradox of invisibility is torture in itself. When the master wants her, she must be hyper-visible, her every move scrutinized. When she's outside those walls, she's erased, a ghost roaming Rome's bustling streets. The weight of being seen only as property, never as person, is crushing. Breaks don't exist. Meals, if one can call them that, are snatched scraps. Barley porridge, bread so coarse it scratches the throat. Maybe a few olives if fortune tilts in her favor. Wine is watered down to keep the laborers docile. She envies the dogs who sometimes get bones with meat still clinging. She laughs bitterly at the thought, imagine being jealous of a dog. That's joke number 1, the kind she shares with a fellow slave. At least the dog wags his tail when he's fed. We just wag our tongues. And then there's the housework. Fields by day, household chores by night. The mosaic floors must gleam, the oil lamps refilled, the master's sandals scrubbed until they shine like new. Imagine cleaning someone's shoes after they've spent the day strutting through Rome's filthiest streets. Honestly, that's a health hazard disguised as servitude. The cruelty doesn't always come with whips. Sometimes it's boredom. the kind of grinding monotony that eats at the soul. To sweep the same courtyard daily, to grind grain until the sound becomes a lullaby of despair, to feel life shrinking into an endless loop of tasks, it's a punishment in slow motion. Modern complaints about soul-sucking jobs pale beside this. She isn't just trapped in drudgery, she's trapped without a paycheck, without an end date, without even the option to quit. Historians still argue whether slave women in domestic service were better off than those on farms. The debate is frankly insulting when you think about it. Better off doesn't mean good. Domestic slaves might have roofs over their heads, but they were also at the constant mercy of masters' whims. A clumsy accident, a dropped cup, a spilled jug of wine could mean lashes or worse. Agricultural slaves endured sun and back-breaking toil, but sometimes the sheer number of them provided a strange safety in anonymity. Better off? It's like asking whether you'd rather be stuck in a cage with wolves or sharks. On rare occasions, rumors drift through the barracks. Talk of Spartacus decades earlier, whispers of uprisings in Sicily, vague stories of slaves who slipped away under night's cover and never returned. She listens with half a heart. Hope is dangerous. It tastes sweet but often poisons faster than despair. Yet, she can't stop imagining. One joke she mutters to herself while grinding wheat. If I ever escape, I'll make bread so fine even the emperor would choke on it. It's both fantasy and insult. In quieter moments, she steals fragments of rest. A hand resting too long on the loom. A pause while carrying a water jug. Each second stolen feels like a rebellion. A flicker of control in a life stripped bare of choice. One fellow slave once told her, in a whisper, "We are like water in their hands. They try to grip tighter, but we slip through anyway." A poetic thought, but dangerous. Such sayings could earn lashes if overheard. At the end of the day, her body aches so thoroughly she can't tell where the pain begins. Feet swollen, shoulders raw, fingers stiff. She crawls into the corner of the barracks where women sleep together in cramped quarters, the air thick with sweat and damp straw. Laughter sometimes bubbles up among them, not joy, but release. A human sound to remind themselves they still exist. Third joke of the day. Tomorrow, maybe the gods will send us rain. At least then we'll get a free bath. It earns a weak chuckle before silence settles again. As she drifts into shallow sleep, one thought gnaws at her mind. Tomorrow will be the same. Work without end, day without mercy. The cruelty isn't in the pain alone, it's in the predictability, the grinding certainty that no dawn will bring change. And in that certainty lies the cruelest cliffhanger. What happens when a life becomes so repetitive, so painfully uniform that even suffering itself starts to feel like routine? The slave woman wakes with a dull ache, not from labor alone, but from the knowledge that her body itself has become the most marketable tool she possesses. In Rome, her flesh is both her curse and her currency. She knows this too well. Every glance from her master or his guests reminds her that her body is not her own. It belongs to whoever holds the deed, and there is no law in the empire eager to shield her. Historians still argue whether Roman slave women were more exploited as domestic concubines than as field laborers. The distinction is meaningless to her. Both fates carry cruelty, just in different costumes. In the countryside, her back is broken by work. In the urban villa, her body is broken by demand. Either way, her humanity is dismissed. There are records of women sold specifically as concubines, their youth and appearance advertised in markets. Auction blocks did not merely list strength or skill. They listed curves, skin tone, and hair, as if describing fruit in a stall. Imagine a marketplace where you are both product and prisoner, where your age can lower your value overnight. Rome mastered this twisted economy, and it's one reason historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of women vanished into sexual slavery within its borders. One fringe tidbit, slave women sold as wet nurses were highly sought after, but some were deliberately forced to starve their own children so that their milk could be preserved for their master's offspring. Picture the cruelty: a woman's natural bond with her child severed, her milk redirected to nourish the elite, while her own infant is left to die. It's a policy that today would earn global outrage, yet in Rome it was recorded matter-of-factly, as though no tragedy existed. Her memories swirl back to the auction where her fate shifted. She recalls the feel of cold marble beneath her bare feet, the crowd's eyes judging her body, the probing hands of buyers who measured her like livestock. A joke she still mutters bitterly: at least cows are sold with their calves. We don't even get that much respect. It's humor in a minor key, but humor nonetheless the only way to survive humiliation without shattering completely. In her master's villa, exploitation hides beneath a thin veneer of luxury. She is ordered to share her master's bed when summoned, no matter her will. Consent doesn't exist in this world. Refusal is impossible. Roman writers themselves admitted this openly. Slave women were expected to satisfy men, whether their master, his sons, or his guests. Historians still argue whether Roman wives tolerated this as custom or despised it privately, but in either case, the slave bore the consequences. If she conceives a child, the outcome depends entirely on the master's whim. Sometimes the child is kept, growing into another slave to expand the household's wealth. Other times the infant is discarded, exposed to die at the city's edges. There is no certainty. She has no say. Her womb is another asset to be managed or disposed of. The cruelty is not just in the act, but in the constant uncertainty of whether love itself is allowed. Even when she is not used as concubine, her femininity is twisted into servitude. She is dressed to attend her mistress, forced to comb hair, paint faces, and arrange jewels she will never own. The contrast is brutal. She polishes beauty onto others, while her own body is left scarred and weary. Sometimes, as she pins a golden brooch into her mistress's toga, she thinks of how many bushels of grain that jewel could buy, how many children it could feed. Joke number 2. If I ever steal one of these brooches, I'll buy myself back and ask for a refund. Of course, she never could. Theft would bring mutilation or death. But the humor lingers, whispered only in her head. Another cruelty is the deliberate tearing of families. If she bears a child, she knows that child may be sold away at any time. Motherhood for her is never permanent. Love itself is a calculated risk. Historians still argue whether some masters allowed bonds of family to grow among their slaves or deliberately shattered them to maintain control. Evidence exists for both, leaving modern scholars unsure. For her, it doesn't matter. Every lullaby carries the undertone of dread. Tomorrow, the crib may be empty. And yet, despite the suffocation, resilience blooms in secret. Slave women find ways to create kinship even without blood. They nurse one another's children, braid each other's hair, and whisper stories from their homelands. They create sisterhoods in the shadows, networks of care that Roman law cannot touch. This is survival disguised as tenderness. The villa's halls echo with contradictions. Marble pillars shine, mosaics glitter, fountains splash gently. Visitors praise the beauty of Roman domestic life. Yet behind the curtains, in cramped quarters near the kitchens, women huddle on straw, bruises hidden beneath their tunics. The empire's glamour is a mask, and she knows it. Sometimes when sent to the baths with her mistress, she overhears gossip about philosophers who debate freedom and virtue, one quirk of Roman intellectual life. Even Stoic philosophers like Seneca wrote essays on kindness to slaves, but owned many themselves. Imagine hearing your very existence debated as a philosophical riddle while you scrub the bathwater of those debating. She almost laughs. Joke number 3. If the philosophers ever free us, I'll thank them by charging rent for all these lectures I've endured. But the laughter doesn't last long. She's reminded daily that her value is conditional. A wrinkle, a scar, a sickness could lower her worth instantly. She could be sold at a loss, discarded, or killed without consequence. The knowledge hangs over her constantly, heavier than any iron collar. At night, she lies awake, listening to the sounds of the villa, the dripping fountain, the hushed conversations of her masters, the faint cries of other slaves in distant rooms. She wonders which fate is worse, to be worked until the body collapses or to be used until the spirit breaks. Both options feel like different roads leading to the same abyss. And then, one night, as she drifts between sleep and wakefulness, she hears footsteps approaching, heavy, deliberate, echoing in the corridor. She freezes, her stomach twisting with dread. She knows what footsteps in the night usually mean, but this time they stop outside her door. A hand lingers on the handle, then withdraws. Silence. She exhales, shaken but alive, and the unspoken question lingers in the dark. Tomorrow night, will the footsteps stop or will they enter? Morning returns, but this time the air feels different. A festival day, her mistress announces, and the villa is alive with preparations. For the slave woman, the difference is small. Work doesn't pause, it multiplies. Garlands must be woven, altars polished, offerings prepared. Yet beneath the sweat and bustle lies something stranger. Religion, the faint promise of connection to powers greater than the whip. Rome is never short on gods. Jupiter thunders from above, Mars demands blood, Venus flaunts beauty. But for enslaved women, devotion often takes humbler forms. In the smoky corners of kitchens or whispered at hearths, they reach toward household spirits, lares and penates, guardians of doorways and food stores. She lights oil lamps not just for her mistress's family, but for herself, silently begging these invisible powers for one thing: survival. Historians still argue whether these household cults offered genuine solace to slaves or merely reinforced hierarchy. Did the rituals remind them they were part of a shared household, or did they mock them by underscoring their servitude? The evidence is murky, but the longing in her eyes when she bows at the shrine is clear. For her, belief is less about theology and more about a fleeting sense that someone or something might still see her. One quirky tidbit: in some rural estates, masters forced slaves to march in ritual processions wearing masks of animals or demons, both to entertain the elite and to ward off evil. Imagine being dragged into a religious play where you're both clown and prop. She remembers stumbling under a crude lion mask, the heat suffocating, the laughter of free citizens echoing around her. Religion here isn't redemption, it's performance. Still, there are moments when sacred practices offer her a crack of light. She recalls an older slave woman who whispered myths of Ceres, the goddess of grain and motherhood. In those stories, the goddess mourns her daughter, stolen away into darkness. The parallel is too obvious. Mothers weeping for lost children, powerless to reclaim them. Tears prick her eyes each time the tale is retold. She wonders if Ceres hears them, or if even the goddess is too busy grieving to notice. And then there is fear. Religion in Rome isn't just prayers, it's punishment cloaked in sanctity. Defy a master, and you might be whipped before the household altar, forced to atone, not for sin, but for disobedience. Some masters declared that disloyal slaves angered the gods, using divine wrath as an excuse for cruelty. Historians still argue whether this was cynical manipulation or genuine superstition. For the woman kneeling with lashes burning across her back, the distinction doesn't matter. Pain is pain, whether delivered by man or blamed on heaven. Her duties sometimes include preparing sacrifices. She plucks feathers from birds, lights incense, and scrubs the bloodstains from altars. The irony gnaws at her. She serves in rituals meant to secure prosperity for her owners, prosperity that will never trickle down to her. Watching smoke curl into the air, she imagines her own prayers rising unseen, only to be scattered by the wind. Yet amid the smoke, she finds odd companionship. Other slave women gather near the hearth shrine, and for a brief moment the hierarchy thins. They trade stories, sometimes even laughter, as they murmur invocations. Joke number 1 bubbles out when one woman quips, "If the gods really watch us, they must be asleep. We've swept the same courtyard 3 times, and no miracle yet." Laughter ripples, hushed but real. Humor here is half blasphemy, half survival. During Saturnalia, the holiday when roles reverse for a day, the villa becomes chaotic. Masters hand slaves wine, allow them to mock authority and pretend equality. For her, the festival is both intoxicating and bitter. Drinking freely, eating better food, even tossing playful insults at her mistress, it feels like a dream. But she knows dawn will end it. Saturnalia is a joke with a cruel punchline, a taste of freedom designed to remind slaves exactly how much they lack it. She recalls one Saturnalia when her master forced her to sing bawdy songs in front of guests. The humiliation still burns in memory. And yet, she also remembers sneaking extra bread from the table, sharing it later with a starving child in the barracks. Joke number 2 whispered in the shadows. The gods give with one hand and snatch with the other. I just make sure to steal with both. Philosophers sometimes drift into these conversations. Stoics preach that all souls are equal, that slavery is a condition of the body, not the spirit. Comforting words, perhaps, if you're the philosopher sipping wine in a marble atrium. To her, equality of souls doesn't soften chains. She scoffs quietly while scrubbing floors, muttering her third joke. If souls are equal, maybe mine should take a vacation while my body does the work. And yet, she clings to fragments of belief. Not because she thinks gods will swoop in with deliverance, but because rituals give shape to hope. Lighting a lamp, chanting a prayer, weaving a garland, these acts remind her she's still capable of intention, of desire. When all else is stripped away, Even superstition becomes a kind of rebellion. But fear always lurks close. One evening, a fellow slave dares to mutter that the gods must be blind to allow such suffering. The words drift too far, caught by an overseer. The punishment is swift. Flogged before the household altar, forced to kneel in blood while incense burns overhead. The slave woman watches, trembling. Religion, she realizes, is a double-edged blade, both balm and weapon, depending on who wields it. That night, she lies awake staring at the ceiling beams, wondering if prayers are nothing more than whispers into emptiness. But then she hears another woman's soft murmur across the room, a lullaby sung not to a child, but to the night itself. The melody soothes her despite her doubts. Belief may not change the gods, but it changes the heart, if only for a moment. And in that moment, as moonlight slides through cracks in the shutters, she allows herself to believe not in salvation, but in the fragile possibility that tomorrow might hold something more than chains. Yet even as she drifts towards sleep, the overseer's footsteps echo in memory, reminding her that gods may forgive, but masters rarely do. And when the whip meets the altar again, who will dare to question whether the gods truly listen? The villa grows quieter with each passing season, but the silence is not peace, it is erasure. Slave women like her live and die, yet their voices dissolve into dust before history cares to write them down. The marble monuments remember generals, emperors, and matrons with respectable titles. But the women who cleaned those stones, who bore children that built the empire's labor force, who suffered indignities too ordinary for chroniclers, those women vanish between the lines. Historians still argue whether silence in the records reflects deliberate suppression or the natural decay of memory. Either way, the effect is the same. She is invisible, and invisibility is a torture sharper than chains because it devours not just the present, but the future. She sometimes imagines what it would mean to be remembered. Would her name ever be inscribed on a tablet? Would anyone 100 years later know the sound of her voice? One quirky tidbit preserved in graffiti suggests that some slaves did leave marks. Scratched onto walls in Pompeii are rough sketches, obscene jokes, and names possibly by enslaved people stealing seconds of identity. She dreams of carving her name somewhere permanent, though she knows the overseer would whip her raw if caught. Every day she repeats the same cycle: labor, humiliation, survival. But memory is the cycle's cruelest edge. She remembers her village, her mother, the laughter of children who once played by the river. The memories blur now, like fading ink, and she fears forgetting them entirely. What is left when even memory abandons you? Sometimes she catches rumors of freedom. Masters occasionally grant manumission formal release from slavery. Roman law allowed it under strict conditions, and some women did win it, often by bearing children to their masters or earning enough to buy themselves back. Yet for most, it was fantasy. Historians still argue whether manumission was generous pragmatism or simply a way to ensure loyalty among the enslaved. For her, it remains an unattainable dream, a mirage on the horizon. The cruelty of her condition lies not only in what she suffers, but in the knowledge that it is systemic. She isn't singled out because of personal failings. She suffers because Rome requires her to. Its economy, its luxuries, even its art depend on countless women like her. Every mosaic, every amphora, every loaf of bread contains invisible fingerprints of slave women. Rome's glory is their graveyard, and yet traces remain. In fragments of law codes, in the margins of elite writings, in rare accounts of abuse scandals, glimpses of these women surface. They appear as concubines, nurses, laborers, or rebels, never fully themselves, always refracted through someone else's gaze. She knows this even without reading. She feels it each time her identity is flattened into property. Still, she resists in quiet ways. She whispers jokes with others in the barracks, small rebellions disguised as laughter. Joke number 1. If the gods record every word, at least someone's writing our history. Joke number 2. When Rome finally falls, may the barbarians make the masters sweep for once. Joke number 3, murmured only to herself. Perhaps my silence will echo louder than their words. These fragments of wit aren't just entertainment, they're survival strategies, and survival itself is defiance. Each day she wakes, she undermines the system that wants her reduced to nothing. Her existence, though unrecorded, resists erasure. She may never be named in scrolls, but she is there in every cobblestone laid, every thread woven, every child raised. At night, the barracks are filled with restless sighs. Some women cry quietly into the straw, others murmur prayers, others simply stare at the ceiling in silence. She wonders which is worse, the lash of pain or the weight of hopelessness. The Empire may silence them, but within these cramped walls, whispers create a collective memory. They tell each other stories not of emperors, but of themselves. Small oral traditions, fragile as breath, yet more human than the statues outside. And then one evening, an older slave woman leans close and says, "One day, none of us will remain, but our chains will. Perhaps that is how history will remember us, not by our names, but by the iron that bound us." The words sink deep, chilling her more than any winter wind. Silence is enforced, but traces leak through. In court cases, we hear echoes of slaves testifying under torture. In letters, we glimpse references to the girl sent on errands. In medical texts, we see enslaved women used for experimentation. It's not memory in its fullest form, but its residue, the crumbs of human lives swept into footnotes. She doesn't know this future, of course. She only knows her present. But as she lies awake, she senses that her suffering is not meaningless, that even in silence there is a strange power. To endure is to testify, even if the testimony is wordless. And so the question lingers, like smoke in a dark room. When history tries to erase you, is survival itself the loudest protest? The thought follows her into uneasy dreams. The barracks creak, the lamps flicker, the silence deepens. Somewhere, in the shadows of Rome, another woman laughs bitterly, another weeps, another clings to hope. Together, they form an invisible chorus, haunting the empire that pretends not to hear them. And their story does not end here. It lingers in silence, waiting for someone centuries later to listen. The pace softens now, drifting from the clamor of Rome into the hush of reflection. The heavy images of chains, of bruises, of silenced voices begin to dissolve, fading like smoke in the evening air. What remains is not the sharp sting of cruelty, but the softer awareness that even in suffering, there is resilience. The women whose names were never written still left impressions on stones worn smooth by their touch, in lullabies whispered into the night, in the faint laughter that rose even under the lash. The story you have heard is heavy, yes, but it is also fragile. It invites not dread, but recognition. To lean back now is to let those echoes settle, not as noise, but as memory. The cruelty of Rome is long gone, yet the endurance of those forgotten women endures, quietly threading its way into the present. Imagine the silence of their barracks now stretched into peace. No overseer's footsteps, no whip cracking, no prayers punished, only the faint rhythm of breathing, the slow turning of earth, the reassurance that their struggles are no longer unseen. In this softened space, the ghosts of Rome's slave women are no longer chained but drifting, remembered if only for tonight. As you close your eyes, let the tension ease. Let the weight of history slide gently away. What lingers is not despair but calm, the stillness that follows when stories have been told and silence is finally allowed to mean rest, not erasure. And as the last threads of this tale dissolve, consider this. The next journey will take us deeper into another hidden corner of history, where voices long silenced still wait to be heard.